Well, good morning. Thank you once again for joining us this blustery Sunday morning. We're hopefully getting close to the end of the rain. At least this storm's been a little bit warmer. I hope you all set your clocks forward last night so that you don't. Well, I guess you can watch this video anytime you want. You don't have to watch it at 10 o'clock. Easter's right around the corner. I mean, it's going to come fast. So we'd love to invite you all out to join us on that Easter Sunday. It's going to be a very special service. Other than that, our men's group meets on Monday nights at 6:30 here at the Father's house and on Zoom. If you want to be a part of that, let Pastor Carlos or CR know. Our ladies group is still going through the book of Amos on Thursday nights at 6:30 on Zoom. We'd love to have you be a part of that. Let Deanna or me know and we can hook you up. We've got quite a few ladies on it, so we'd love to have you join us. I got a text message or some pictures from Pastor Mario this morning that Pastor Juan in Argentina has pretty much completed the work that he was raising the money to do for the approval so that they could meet at the church. They had some neighbors' complaints. We talked about that a few weeks ago, and we were raising money for that. So today is our capital improvements offering. With all this rain, we've had a couple of leaks on the roof, so we're going to have to be getting up there and repairing those. So anything you can give towards that would be greatly appreciated. You know the drill. You can go to thefathershouse.org, click on the giving button, set it up as a one-time gift or a recurring gift. You can give to the capital improvements that way, or you can give to our missions in Argentina or India. You can mail a check to us here at the Father's House at 133 Bernal Road, San Jose, California, 95119. Or if you live in the local area and you'd like Pastor Carl or I to come by and pick up your tithe checks, we'd be happy to do that. Again, thank you very much for all your generosity in keeping the lights on here at the Father's house and keeping all the repairs done that need to be done. We just finished putting in a water heater that was very expensive. And like I said, we're going to have to be getting up on that roof and doing some of the repairs so that we don't have leaks from the roof. So anyway, if you'd like to help with any of that, we'd take the volunteer on that too. So just let us know. I hope you enjoy your day. Right now, we'll turn the time over to Pastor Carl and see what he has to teach us about Jesus.
Well, good morning, Father's House. As Penny said, we're an hour ahead of schedule, so it means everybody's probably tired. And when everybody gets to church, you're going to probably get to church about an hour late or about the time it gets finished. Well, most people will, because most people are going to forget that we spring forward or it's daylight savings time. And so here we go. We get to have our long evenings back so we can walk a little bit later and do a little bit more in the evening or whatever the case might be. Get started on our gardens if we can get rid of this rain and things along those lines. So anyway, glad to be here today. Glad to be here with you as we kind of explore and talk more about this subject that we're talking about. But man, spring is upon us. I think all of us are more than ready for it. At least we are here. It looks like we're going to get a little bit, well, quite a bit more rain here coming late Monday night or into Tuesday morning. And hopefully that'll be the last big hurrah and we can start to get the planet dried out over here in Northern California. Anyway, it's been a good rain year, so we should be pleased with that. And the best part about it is we're almost all the way through it. And it's been a long one this year. So with that, then I guess we could talk about other things, but maybe we should get to what I'm here to talk about, and that is we're still talking about the life of Jesus, or Jesus, the notion of Jesus being, for the people and of the people, or with the people, where Jesus basically, it says the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among us, and this idea that God in the incarnation of Jesus Christ came to dwell amongst his people, to live amongst us, and he still does by his Spirit. But we've been talking about that, in the book of John, the reason that he became flesh, right, was so that he could explain the Father to us. And so it's this idea that he came to interpret the Father for us, or to be able to describe what the Father's heart was towards his creation and towards his people. So we talk about in the book of James that, I'm not sorry, in the book of John, that he really kind of deals with this idea of the father-son relationship, our adoption as fathers, as a father, sons and daughters, along those kind of lines. So we talk about daughters, the Samaritan daughter, you could call her, and we can talk about the sons. We talk about Nicodemus, or we talk about the man that was the paralytic that was at the pool of Bethesda, and this idea and this notion that what Jesus's personal encounters with individual people is what we're looking at now, and they say something very significant about the way that he conveys the Father's heart to us. So today we're going to look at another figure that I believe that I could make the theological argument that is the centerpiece of the Johannine Gospel, the very center and the heart of what it is that John wants to explain about Jesus' explaining the Father to us. But I want to talk about two concepts first. I want to talk about the concept of what sin is and the concept of what grace is first, just for a minute. Now, the reason that I want to do that is because in many cases, what we do is we see sin as this thing of, well, we're going to call people out on their sin because they're guilty before God, and they're going to hell because they've sinned. And so we've kind of seen it that way. And yet Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, right, or to judge the world. And he says that in John, the gospel that we're in John chapter 3. He says, for God did not send his son into the world to judge the world, but that through him that the world might be saved. So when we're talking about sin and we're talking about grace, I want to kind of use those two tensions here when we're talking about this text. It applies to last week's text as well. As sin is the idea of those actions or those structural things that are put in place in our life that basically are that bring forth death, and they don't bring forth life. Those things that are not life affirming. So they're life killing to some extent. And then on the other side of that, when we talk about grace, and we're going to talk about that today, and the concept of grace is that which gives life. It's that which is life affirming and not life negating. And so when we're talking about sin and we're talking about grace, that's why Jesus said to the man that was at the pool of Bethesda, when he said, go, pick up your pallet and walk. And then later on, he had a conversation with him and said, go and sin no more, or go and don't do things that don't give life. Don't do things that kill life. Because that's what sin is. Sin just kills the divine life in us. And what we find is grace causes that divine life in us to grow, to prosper, to live. And so if we think about sin along those lines, we're not so much looking at maybe the act of what a sin is, but we're looking at what sin does in the fact that it just kills us when we're speaking about our divine life or our spiritual life or who we are. I hope that makes sense. Maybe I can explain a little bit more as we're talking. So we're going to talk about the woman that's caught in adultery. And it's interesting that you would say, when I said that this woman caught in adultery, I don't know what it is about this story, but it's the story that for me personally is kind of the center of the gospel in kind of a strange way. I mean, I know we can talk about the crucifixion, death, burial, resurrection, ascension, and all of the incarnation, all of the Christ event in its totality, and that's significant. But there's something about this story that kind of reveals the heart of the Father in what it is that Jesus does. And so I think we're just going to go read that text, and then we'll see what we can kind of pull out of it. So we're going to be in John again for a little bit more, and eventually we're going to get out of John and get into some of the other books as we kind of talk about other things about in the life of Jesus. But we're in John chapter 8, and I'm going to pick up in verse 1. It says, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives early in the morning. Early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him. And he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery And having set her, now get this, in the center of the court in the temple. So she's placed in the very center of the court. That's why I think this whole story is kind of a front and center explanation of what Jesus wanted to explain about the Father. And they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What then do you say? Then, excuse me, they were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. Again he stooped to the ground and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone with the woman where she was, in the center of the court. Straightening up, Jesus said to her, Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you? And she said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, I do not condemn you either. Go from now on and sin no more. So I think it's interesting that in this Johannine gospel that John teases forward twice in the story that this woman was at the center of the temple, at the very center of this place of worship. But being at the center in this place of worship, she's not there on very good terms, is she? I mean, what can you say? I mean, she's at probably the height of whatever shame she's ever felt in her life, completely feeling, I mean, maybe she wasn't naked physically, but she was emotionally feeling very vulnerable and she was feeling very naked. And yet I asked myself the question, why does this story become so pronounced and become so profound when we're talking about the idea of the heart of the gospel being Jesus wanting to explain the heart of the Father? And so we have a couple of things here happening. First of all, we have this woman that's been caught in the very act of adultery. Now, maybe she was set up by them, but the interesting thing is they wanted to take this woman as an object in order to test Christ, in order that they might find fault with his teaching so that they could call him a heretic, and ultimately what they would want to do at that point was they wanted to kill him. So they brought this woman caught in adultery, not because they were concerned about her and about her spiritual warfare, but they wanted to objectify her in front of them, humiliate her in front of him so that they might test him to see if they could find a fault in what it was that he was saying. So what kind of sets the scene, if you kind of bring yourself into the temple, is this woman comes into this scene, and as she comes into this scene, into this scene, she's placed at the very center of religious thought, in a vulnerable spot to where she's completely disgraced and humiliated, not just by what she had done, but by the way that the people were going to make these religious leaders, really, were going to make a public example of her. But it's interesting to see that Jesus then begins to turn the tables on this. And he doesn't allow them to objectify this woman. He doesn't allow them to destroy her with structural sin. And it was really their sin. The fact that they would be bringing her, and what they wanted to do was test Jesus. And even at the cost of this woman's life, if Jesus would said, well, the law's the law, go ahead and stone her. But Jesus takes a completely different posture here. I mean, I guess he could have said, well, you know what? Yeah, which Moses wrote is absolutely right. So yeah, you have every right to stone her. And he kind of does say, you do have the right to stone her. But the first thing that he does is, rather than facing them with this challenge head on, what he does is he takes a posture of humility concerning the situation. In other words, rather than standing toe-to-toe with them and arguing with them or trying to prove one position was right and the other one was wrong, he simply just stoops down. He basically humbles himself and takes the place of humility. So he lowers himself. And in doing that, it probably kind of caught them off guard because they didn't expect him. So Jesus stoops down to the ground and he begins to doodle in the dirt. And we wonder about what he wrote, and I don't think it's important what he wrote or the text would have said it was. But the idea is, I think it's the position that he took. Rather than standing with them in a position that was not life affirming, he chose to participate in that type of sin that sought to destroy life. So instead of participating, he got down on the ground. And for some extent of time, to some extent, he refused to answer their question. Finally, after they pressured him more about what he would do and what his answer was, he finally stood up and he looked at them and said, okay, you're right. The law of Moses does say that she should be stoned. But I wanted to discuss something here with you. How about this? Let's use this as an action. If you haven't sinned, then why don't you go ahead and throw the first stone? Now, it's interesting because the minute he said that, the men probably already had their stones gathered to kill her. And in the midst of doing that, thinking they had trapped Jesus and that they were doing justice for this woman, that what happened is Scripture says that they probably had to stop and think about what it is that they were going to do and how it is that they were going to treat this woman. You see, in some instances, if we look at sin as being that which kills divine life, had they thrown those rocks at the woman, they would have been killing the divine life that is in her, but they would also be killing the divine life that is in them. When Jesus stooped down, he took the form of a humble servant, not as a lord to lord over somebody else. But the scribes and Pharisees, they lorded over this woman, didn't they? And so then Jesus says, let me show you the heart of the Father in this. Okay, you're right. What she has done is not life-affirming. She's kind of shooting her own life in the foot. She's killing herself without maybe even knowing it. And all you want to do is finish the task. But how about this? You throw the first stone. And they sat there and thought about it. Now, the older men that were there at that time, you would think that they had more wisdom, and they probably did, because the text tells us that the older men looked at the woman, looked inside themselves, and realized that they had no right to cast a stone at this woman, and they maybe had gotten caught up in the frenzy of the moment. So the elder statesmen dropped their rocks and began to walk away. And in the end, there was a few youth there still with rocks, feeling the right to stone this woman for what she had done. And yet they finally realized that the older had left, and looking even deeper into themselves and maybe taking the time to look, they realized that they were really in no position to throw a rock at her at all. And so as they leave, when Jesus is still stooping down, he simply raises up again this time. He looks at the woman and he says, woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you? And she says, no one, my Lord, has condemned me. And Jesus says the most beautiful thing. He says, neither do I condemn you. I'm not condemning you. And in saying that, there was this beautiful notion again, an idea of that, for God did not send his world into to judge the world, but that through him the world might be reconciled. Jesus was not in a position of wanting to destroy this woman, of calling out her sin. He wanted to reconcile her. And in the middle, and the point that and the fact that she's at the very center of the temple, and that Jesus is having this encounter. And when they're trying to test him and wanting to kill this woman, Jesus just kind of comes along and says, but that's not the heart of the Father. The heart of the Father is always that of reconciliation. It's always that of imparting divine life. It's always that of imparting grace. And so in this beautiful story, Jesus explains the Father's heart. I'm not here to condemn you. I don't want to condemn you. All I can say is that the actions that you're doing is you're hurting yourself. And that's what he says when he says, and go and sin no more. He wasn't saying sin no more like scolding her with his finger. He's saying, the reason I don't want you to do that is because whenever you sin, whenever you allow those things into your life, they kill the divine life in you. And what I came was to give you the grace of the divine life. So what we really have is we have a story about the idea of sin and grace. This idea of death and life. And what Jesus came to do in this story, and why it's the centerpiece, I think of the whole heart of the Gospel of John is the idea that, remember, grace and truth were realized in Jesus Christ. Grace. And in that grace, it's always life affirming. You find in every encounter that Jesus had with an individual in the Johannine Gospel, it always affirmed life and never destroyed life. So that leaves us with the question. In our life, are there things in our lives that destroy our divine life? And if so, then Jesus is saying, help yourself in those. Try to do better in those things because they destroy that divine life that's in you. And he's saying, but have enough grace in your life to recognize God's working in your life that always wants to lead you towards redemption. And so this story is not just about us personally, but it's also about the way that we treat others. Are we in a position, or do we take the position that we want to accuse people of what they've done wrong, of treat them poorly and laugh at their nakedness and call them out on their sins that they already know exist in them? Or do we want to be people that extend the divine life by the way of the grace of God? What Jesus came to teach was that the Father didn't come and didn't want to condemn the world. He didn't want to judge the world, but he wanted to reconcile the world to himself. And I think that's the story that's being told here. I think it's a profound story. So whenever you're feeling disgraced, whenever you're feeling like you're less than what you could be, remember this one thing, that God does not condemn you, and he's looking for a better future for you. I think that's all I want to say today about this. I think this is an important story, an important building block to understanding the heart of God. And I hope that it makes you want to say yes to the love of God, yes to the grace of God. And if it does that, well, then maybe I've done my job today. Well, God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll see you again next week.